Please welcome Jonathan Paskey, executive producer and co-founder at Dev Network.
Welcome back, everybody, to the main stage. My name is Jonathan Paskey, executive producer and co-founder here at Dev Network. For our second and final VIP networking chat and fireside chat here on the main stage at DeveloperWeek Europe. We've got some great guests for you today. We're going to be talking about engineering trends. So let's go ahead and get the panel on the screen. Welcome, everybody. Hi there.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here. We're going to go ahead and have you guys introduce yourselves, some of our speakers here at DeveloperWeek Europe that we brought back for our VIP fireside chat, talking about engineering trends. So Teresa, why don't you go first?
Thank you. Hello, everyone, and nice to meet you here. My name is Teresa. I'm a software engineer working for JPMorgan Chase, and I'm in a team to build the Chase app, which was launched recently in the UK market.
Perfect, perfect. David?
I'm David Hart. I'm CTO and co-founder of NetFoundry. NetFoundry runs a network as a service offering where we manage, orchestrate, and operate networks based on OpenZD, which is open source technology for a network overlay for application embedded zero trust.
And Yishai?
Hi, I'm Yishai Viri. I'm a CTO at LinRB. And we are focused on helping developers and dev teams improve, looking at the data from the systems like Git and Jira and providing insights, automations.
Perfect. Thanks for being here, all of you guys. We're going to just talk briefly engineering trends. The state of the engineering industry and developers has been constantly shifting. And as we saw just with the last talk, right, we're talking about some companies are hiring engineers at a breakneck pace. Retaining talent is a hard thing to do. Shipping code is also changing as we go, especially not particularly with the pandemic itself, but we've seen a lot of innovations on how developers code and how engineering teams operate over the last 2 years, having to go to more of a remote team sort of forecast as we go along the way. So one of the first questions I want to ask all of you is what are some of the new technology innovations that you think are having an impact on engineering teams? Could be, something as small as just or as enduring as containerization, right? That has been going on for years and years with the new or the implementation of cloud native, but also something like AI or blockchain that hasn't had as big of an impact, but is starting to have an impact along the way. So tell me some of your thoughts as to those new technology innovations impacting engineering teams. We'll go back to Teresa. Why don't we start with you?
Thank you. So basically, I'm more specialized in the front-end technology, and I'm also in the front-end team in my company. So I will talk about trending trends in front-end more specifically. I will mention about the word of multi-platform. I know, because I talked about multi-platform a few months ago in a different conference, and I heard people ask me, Teresa, I heard about multi-platform like 10 years ago. Why are you still talking about it? It's correct. So this is something that is always like a hot topic in the front-end world. In the past, when you hear about the word of cross-platform, multi-platform, probably it's mainly focused on delivering project for iOS and Android using shared code. That's why you have packages like Xamarin or PhoneGap. But nowadays, as the technology innovate and the things get improved, multi-platform has different meaning now. For example, right, multi-platform could be you write the code once and you can use it literally everywhere, like mobile, desktop, web, TV, wearables, and game consoles, right? And this, again, the concept of multi-platform, which I probably will dive in a bit more in later on, but in general, I heard people thinking in a way that we use multi-platform to cut cost, to save cost, to have a smaller engineering team. So if this is the way how you want to use multi-platform, if that's your goal, you might actually do it wrong. The purpose of having multi-platform is to help you improve productivity, to help you to ship things faster, to meet your customer quicker. That's why we use multi-platform. It also enable your team to work closer to each other. And what we are doing now is multi-platform, but not just front end. It can also extend to back end, even to cloud. It's possible. That's where I found it's really interesting and as a new trend in the front end world. Thank you.
Thanks, Teresa. David, what do you see as emerging trends?
Yeah, I loved your comment on multi-platform, where you said, people have been talking about that for 10 years. Why are you saying it's new? A lot of we spend our time is around distributed computing, things that are happening over networks. And you mentioned things like distributed companies and how it's kind of in your face right now for developers to do everything distributed, just like the products they're developing are distributed. And sometimes we'll get into conversations about what we're doing around distributed computing, and I'll hear that, distributed computing at mass scale has been solved for 15 years. It's like, well, yeah, it's been solved in certain cases, but to solve that, generally in the face of the massive connectivity and distributed computing that's happened today, it's a different world. So like we have individual customers who do more, per minute, more per day, certainly than Twitter. It's different kinds of scale for it. But the biggest is like almost any technology trend that you see, it's distributed. Everything's distributed. The people are distributed. The developers are distributed. The data is coming from different sources. The data is massive, and understanding the data is massive. So it's a combination of just the technology impacts. You're looking at AR, VR. You're looking at robotics. You're looking at edge computing. How you move compute power near to where you need it and not near when you don't need it. How does that all work in the face of people who write software, and how do you deal with that as a software engineer versus trying to deal with that as a system level? I caught the tail end of a gentleman giving a talk on CDK, which I liked some of the points that he made right at the end. And he's like, CDK, it's I'm not an expert in it, but basically he was covering that it's an imperative approach to Terraform. So if a software engineer, somebody who likes to write software, is dealing with Terraform, how they want to approach the world. And I see that as a trend that's only becoming more so, and partly becoming more so because it's actually in the developers' faces. They have to think about it every day because it's now their day-to-day life.
Okay, so we've heard multi-platform from Teresa, sort of a distributed everything from an emerging trend from you, David. Yishai, what do you see as some of the emerging trends in the engineering space?
Yeah, so one thing we're seeing more and more of is interest in developer teams and dev orgs trying to introspect, trying to ask questions about what is good behavior of a team, what is a good process to deliver software. So more and more scrutiny to how we do things and not just to the way we build or the components we use or the targets are the target products. I think another trend that is getting stronger is the shift left of everything, codifying everything. David mentioned infrastructure with Terraform and CDK. We all know the security examples. A lot is moving to developers' hands in budgets, where sometimes the spend was owned by IT or security or different parts of the organization. Now it's become dev spend. And that obviously rides on cloud and on a lot of underlying technology and some trends that are not new. But I think it's coming to a point where, okay, now 80-90% of my company is dev in terms of the value, in terms of the cost, in terms of, and that's not just like software companies. Every company, software is eating the world. I think that's also not a new trend. So developers and dev leaders are increasingly aware of that big weight on the dev org and the need to let's introspect, let's understand, how do we talk about is this functioning well? Is this the org working well? Is this team delivering and productive as it should be? Are people happy in their work? All of these questions become more important now.
Yeah,
you gave a great answer. The two that you poked out that I wish I had said was shift left. So we're talking about embedding networking directly into your application. I mean, that's taking security and shifting it all the way to the left, right? I want to be talking to product management, for how we approach this security and how do we develop a secure experience that's also not a ridiculous experience like you might see with standing up VPNs and whatnot. And then that focus on developers, like the power of developers. I was in a conversation with a guy that I'd recently promoted to chief architect, and he told me that the light bulb really went off for me when you explained how much power I have. Right? It's like the things you're saying, the things you're thinking, they are absolutely the things that we need to do. It's like stuff coming from the developer teams. I think it's more recognized even at the executive level how critical that is to the success of the company.
Great.
Yeah, you guys, Yishai, you just mentioned teams, right, as one of the emerging trends, and just it's a good lead off to the next question I want to ask you guys. What do you see as the ideal dev team or engineering team in today's world in 2022? What does that look like? David, you just mentioned things like bringing other groups into the fold, right? We've seen over the years dev teams now coordinating a lot more with product teams. The rise of DevOps over the last 5 to 6 years being more and more integral to shipping products and shipping code. And I think one of you guys mentioned security, right? The idea that as everything moves to the cloud, the security becomes a lot more of a focus as apps that used to be siloed, right, within their own containers along the way. Now you've got things exposed to the internet. And it scares enterprise companies, especially even more so. Those that have been working in cloud native for 10 years, it's not as bad, but you have an app that's been not exposed to the internet before, to the web. Now getting exposed, you have issues with client data, you've got issues with customer data, all of these things along the way. What does that do to the dev team, right? The dev team today in 2022 is much different than a dev team in 10 years ago in 2012, right? Where all of you are old enough to understand and remember, dev teams were off in a closet. Here they are, they're off by themselves. And now those dev teams, as you mentioned, Yishai, spend on dev teams have become much more integral to the organization. What does that do to the dev team? Does it expand it? Does it make it definitely more important to the organization as a whole, as far as value? But what does that do as far as shifting roles? Things that have shifted today in 2022 versus where we were 5-10 years ago.
So I think that the main thing is that dev teams are much closer to the world. Like you'd said that, like they're not closeted off anymore, because modern dev teams and modern dev orgs are able to ship value, through code much more frequently and much more in a streamlined way, because they've shifted left infrastructure, they've shifted left networking, they have automated or cloudified a lot of the steps needed to get new value out in the customer's hands and users' hands. It's a much tighter cycle, much faster. Many modern dev teams are delivering new value to the world hundreds of times a day on a single team, or dozens of times a day. This forces the dev team to be much closer to the user. You can't be like 6 hops away on a chain or an approval chain, or the dev team is done. Now the product will verify, and then QA will take a look, and then eventually dev, like ops, will deploy, and another sect will keep uptime. That can't live anymore if you're shipping value 100 times a day. So you have to be much closer to your customers and users. You have to be blended with more product capabilities or product skilled people, and the boundaries between the dev team and the product team start to erode, or at least they work together in a different way. It's not a handoff. Same with DevOps, or I'm in charge of my uptime. I wrote the code an hour ago and I'm deploying it now, and I will get up at night when it doesn't work. Because if I had to shift that away to someone else, that responsibility, that would mean introducing a 12-hour delay in deploying anything, because I have to tell them about something, teach them how to maintain it. That handoff kills the delivery, the fast or high delivery frequency. And because organizations, they know high delivery frequency is crucial to success, to learning faster from mistakes, to being able to deploy less ready code, but in a way that is safe, but can teach them something, to put out code behind feature flags, all of that. They're not giving that up. So the dev teams are adjusting to become, I can talk with customers, or at least understand users, and I've opened the closet door and moved a few steps into the business, into where interaction with the world happens.
What we talk about at NetFoundry, like as far as the company culture that we're trying to instill, we say we want a culture of edge innovation or permissionless innovation, which can be confusing because a lot of our customers do edge computing, and we're not talking about edge computing. We're talking about innovating on the edge and innovating without permission. So we want our developers to be taking chances, and to take those chances, they have to understand how things are being used, and they need to think deeply about it. And when they do, we see tremendous innovations coming out of our staff, and those are priceless. One of the conflicts that we run into often in the world, and certainly sometimes in our customer base, is the trade-off between security and velocity. Well, if you take the issues of security and really turn that into a software problem that a software engineer can deal with confidently and securely, well, you've made great strides. So it's there's the cultural shifts that we touch on here, and the technology is evolving to facilitate that, because I think it's working.
Teresa, any thoughts on dev teams, ideal dev teams? You just been working on an app for a long time, right? In a big enterprise organization. What do you see as some of the ideal components of those dev teams?
Actually, extending on the topic we were talking about, like for example, DevOps, that's really interesting, because I agree. In the past, right, it's like software engineer is a back-end or front-end engineers. They write the code and they just throw it to the operating team, helping everything with the run and everything with the work. And this is why slowly you have the job title called DevOps. Someone sit in the middle to make sure that everything is working fine. Nowadays, like the DevOps team, right, for example, they mean actually so many things, right? They can be cloud engineer, they can be SRE, or they can be the one doing data maintenance as well, and setting up everything you need to host your everything for your cloud. So, but again, right, I think I agree with the concept that we shift everything to the left, but at the same time, when I look at how we structure the team, right, things that, for example, make sure that team is autonomous, make sure that we have a cross-function team within the big organization. And there's always this team called the core engineering team, or called the dev experience team. These are the one where cloud engineer goes, and they are actually part of the big group. Somehow they're not sitting alongside with, in a way, it's not, they don't sit alongside with each of the delivery team just yet. But I can say it's happening along with the technology like Terraform and other things.
Yeah, on the same topic with the teams, we have a question from the chat addressing skills enhancement and training. Just as an example from each of you, one from each, I guess, how are you guys implementing that in this new, more of a work remote environment, and then the way that teams are formed today, interfacing a lot more with product and business and ops. What are some of the things you guys are doing on your teams for keeping engineers and the teams trained? Right. What are the best examples that you guys have seen, that you're using, or that you've seen for skills enhancement and training? Yishai, let's start with you this time.
Sure. So training and making sure, like leveling up in skills, both for onboarding. You mentioned companies are hiring like crazy. I think at least here in Israel, this is a very, very, felt very strongly as a trend, with tons of new money pouring into the industry, and developers being snatched. So a lot of the workforce is going to be new hires. A lot of the workforce may be skilled developers, but new to the team, to the organization. And I think we should expect that to continue and even grow. So an even more focused challenge around onboarding and helping new developers on the team skill up. Some things that we've seen used, some of them we're trying to use ourselves. First of all, use the coding process in itself in a smart way to help level people up. Let's start with the first, the easy thing. Get people to start reviewing code. If a newbie in the team is beginning to review code, it is a sign to me that they have ramped up to some degree. They are now helping others. Obviously, that takes time, but that is a great signal. So I can watch for that on my new hires and say, is this person now taking their part in code reviews? If they are, that is a good sign that they have at least cleared the first bump, and they are now the first steps are to create some new PRs and some new code. When you are reviewing other people's code, you have cleared some mileage in your wrap up. And then second, and maybe more elaborate, around the same, code is going to get reviewed. Most of the code gets promoted to the code base through peer reviews. Track things like cross-team reviews. Are people from Team A reviewing code from Team B or Team C's work? That is a good way to make sure there's no knowledge silos or less knowledge silos, and good way to spread knowledge across the organization. So maybe encourage that to some degree. You don't want bottlenecks because of a lot of cross-team reviews, but if you're looking at that and being smart about this, you can use the natural process to get more people involved and know about the code base or know about the technologies, even if that's not their day-to-day. So I think code reviews is a great way to, at least in the scope of our code base and our company, the way we work, teach newbies on the team and in the company about the code base, about the product, about the technology. So internal training like that, I think, is great.
Yeah. David, what are you seeing? Skills enhancement training?
Yeah, one of the things we did recently is we created a new team that we call the Developer Experience Team. That's partly as an open core product. We're reaching out to developers constantly. So there's been a business benefit to that. But one of the things that team does is they create what we call Zedifications, where you take our open source SDK, find an existing open source project, and embed it in the project. So the very first one was actually done by an intern that we brought in. He went and embedded ZD into SSH. So that's a core tenet of that team. And what we've been doing is allowing people to temporarily roll into that team and do a Zedification, which partly hits, their interest. So it may be something that, I would think was a really cool thing to Zedify. It may be something that I kind of scratch my head about. But it doesn't really matter because the person is learning on their own. They're branching out into something that interests them, and they're benefiting, our product at the same time by sharing their experiences with it. And we found that to be very effective, partly because it's driven by interest, and partly because, frankly, is a vector to lead to some innovations on our platform.
Developer experience is huge. That's another trend we should have talked about. Totally getting a lot of focus. Definitely.
I was telling my company about my experiences with Twilio, and when Twilio. So I was working on an IoT platform, and had just finished integrating in communication through a bunch of different telcos. I was learning a little bit about Twilio, and I was like, yeah, whatever. We just did all that. It wasn't that bad. And then I finally went to the Twilio site and did it. I was like, oh man, that was beautiful. It was just such a nice little experience. I like to tell that story. Is that's the experience we need for our for engineers using our platform, developers using our platform.
Right, but I think also developer experience for your own developers.
Oh, sure. Like their day-to-day job.
What's their experience in delivering code? Remember Joel Spolsky's 12 points?
Sure. Yep.
Way back. I'm seeing developers interview their future companies, where they choose to where to work based on DX parameters. Like, you're not doing CI, I'm not going to work for you.
Yeah.
Like, waste of my time.
Yeah, we've actually had people. So we happen to do a lot of our core orchestration using AWS. I've had people come in and say, if you move that somewhere else, I don't want to work for you, which is a pretty amazing statement. So we deploy on all clouds, of course, but yeah, it's the bar with interviewing developers has definitely changed. Also, it's definitely you're being interviewed a lot more than maybe you used to be.
Yeah, I actually agree with everything we discussed so far. Like, for example, right, training and enhancing the team should start from when you're recruiting, hiring people who are open-minded, who want to learn something new, who want to actually keep updating themselves. And this goes into, for example, when company provide resources, right? Like, different company have different ways to provide different levels of resources depending on the budget. It can be giving you a assigned budget, or can be providing you like a membership for online learning tool for any developers to grab, and also internal training as well, like from code review, learning from each other, providing workshop or weekly engineering learning study group. All those, right, are what we do as well in JP, of how to make sure that we provide the training to everyone in the team. But at the same time, what I think is also important, apart from apart from company providing resources, is also providing time. In one way, we provide all these tooling resources for everyone that who willing to learn, to upskill. But at the same time, company should also more proactively giving time for people in the team to actually be able to learn. Like, we have this saying in our team, power hour. These are like few hours we can book in a week. That is a time for me, for myself. I can use it to develop a piece of program. I can go away to learn something. So these are the time that I'm saying is my time. Please don't book a meeting in this slot. That's my power hour for myself. So I think that is also important.
One thing that's interesting, so I mentioned a little bit about the culture that we try to cultivate here. That's a big thing that we interview for also, because some people just aren't wired to work in an environment like that. They feel that they're being pushed on things. They just want to be told what to do, and we're not like that. We cheated a little bit when we started off the company, and that a number of the first people that I brought in were people partly that I knew, but had been CTOs who wanted to get back into the business of cranking out software. I just happen to have some of those guys in my network who are perfect with that attitude of empowered edge innovation. But when we find people who get that culture that we're going for and actually see that it really is true, we end up with great fits. There's been times we've actually brought in people who were interviewing and just had them join a workshop we were doing where we were trying to understand a specific problem or come up with ideas. You get a pretty good idea if this is going to be like a beautiful relationship or they're terrified.
Yeah, I think, David, you mentioned like the engineers interviewing the companies has become a bigger thing going into what we're seeing now, and it is about fit. It's about what is being offered and the culture that each there's similar cultures across all dev organizations, but to get the best out of people, right, and out of your engineers, it's actually very beneficial to have them understand what they're getting into, right, from day one. So having them ask the questions, having them sort of empowered to understand the environments that they're going to be working in, makes for happier engineers and more productive engineers, once they get into the code base and once they understand the organization. If they're not happy with the way that it runs, you're not gonna have a very good engineering organization, or you're gonna have pieces of that engineering organization, depending on how big or small you are, that aren't functioning as best they could. So it's better these days to be able to go through that longer interview process and empowering those engineers, which is new. It's been a different experience that I've seen in talking with folks like yourselves over the last couple of years in doing these chats. It has changed a lot. So okay, guys, we have time for one more question. It's one that I like to ask at the end of a lot of these chats. What is the emerging tech trend that excites you the most coming down the pike over the next 5 years? Can could be something, as out there as quantum computing, or something, that's it just really gets you excited talking about Kubernetes. What is the most exciting emerging tech trend that you're excited about in engineering? So Yeshai, we'll start with you this time.
Oh, that's a hard one. I'm seeing some. I feel some new things happening around automation and AI in the coding process. You see GitHub doing some crazy stuff with guessing your next piece of code. That, along with low code and no code, I think are low code has been around for 20 years, if not more. I think it's now maybe ready to break away and make a real dent in what part of business gets served by dev. I think part of everything becoming software, and software eats the world, and now everything moving to code also creates a backwind for low code and no code, because there aren't enough developers. We have a worldwide shortage, and most of the new developers are going to be junior by definition. So a lot of room for less than the usual amount of code or complexity of code, driving a lot of new products or new flows within products. I think that's very interesting to watch.
David, you're next.
Yeah, for me, it's the evolution of edge computing, and that's where people are doing more and more local data centers, so they can bring computing to the edge. And if you look at the way that's evolved, you're starting to see some ideas of the platform as a service concept being brought into the edge computing world, which I think is really interesting, because there's decisions that need to be made live in real time during usage of where different code executes. And to me, that's a perfect example of a place where people will walk in and look at a problem with a very specific mindset, right? You're going to tend to get people with very heavy network engineering, different types of IT backgrounds, looking at that problem as a software engineer, a software developer, leads to different conclusions of it. And I think kind of the movement more to the platform as a service offerings in that domain pushes that more to the problem being solved by software engineers. So I'm expecting to see some further innovations in that space over the next couple of years.
Very cool. Teresa, what do you see as most exciting emerging trend for you?
Okay, I'm going to actually mentioning AI here, but how we do AI. So I believe, you mentioned the people in our age. So for example, 10, 20 years ago, when we talk about AI, right, we probably hear people saying, I don't want a robot in my house. But nowadays, AI is everywhere, literally blended, everywhere in our house, not in a different kind of format. But instead of looking at AI as a threat, or trying to manipulate AI or trying to write some smart algorithm, I think what we are going towards, in the future, is that we are partner with AI. So they are part of our life, and we are building this partnership with them, something we can work together and make our life much, much better. Another thing I say that I like the sound of dev experience as well. That's what actually enhance developer day-to-day work, right? We talk about customer experience, user experience, but dev experience isn't something we mention or talk very often. But I see companies nowadays are actually talking about it, try to embed this culture in the team. So I would like to see more of this going actually spread everywhere.
Perfect. Great answers, all. Great panel. Thanks for all the insights on the emerging trends, dev teams, skills enhancement, and your favorite exciting trends that are coming down the pike in the next couple of years. Teresa, David, Yeshai, thanks for being here. We are out of time, but we will be back here on the main stage for our next talk in about 25 minutes. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.